Her husband uninvited her from their anniversary dinner by text. One message, no punctuation, no apology. Sent at 6:47 in the evening while Celestina Achebe was sitting in the back of a black car, still in the blazer she had worn to the closing, a leather folder resting across her lap. The folder that contained the final signed documents on a $13.4 billion commercial land acquisition that had taken 4 years, 2 restructurings, and 1 very long Tuesday afternoon to complete. He did not know about the folder. He did not know that among the 240 commercial parcels that had quietly transferred into her family's trust that afternoon was the parcel his flagship development project, the North Side Tower, the one he had staked his firm's next 5 years on, sat directly adjacent to. He did not know that the easement his partners had been chasing for 14 months ran through land that now, as of 4:52 that afternoon, belonged to his wife. He knew none of it. What he knew was that Yvette was waiting, that his mother had already set aside a seat, that the restaurant where he had made an anniversary reservation 3 weeks ago, and then quietly forgotten, would be just as good another night. The phone screen dimmed. Outside the car window, Chicago moved through its amber Tuesday evening, indifferent and enormous. And Celestina Achebe, majority trustee of Ose Mensa Land Partners, set her husband's text face down on a $13 billion folder and looked out at the city her grandmother had spent 40 years quietly buying, one deed at a time. This is not just a story about a man who forgot his anniversary. It is a story about what happens when a woman spends 11 years being underestimated by people who never thought to check what was in her name. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who should have known better, this one is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from tonight. To understand what happened that night, we need to go back to where this really began. The car turned off Michigan Avenue at 7:04 p.m. Celestine watched the city rearrange itself outside the window, the wide boulevard narrowing into residential streets, the amber light of the business district softening into the quieter dark of the neighborhood where she and Marcus had lived for 6 years. The driver said nothing. She was grateful for that. She had not cried. She had not called him. She had read the text twice, set the phone down, and spent the remaining 11 minutes of the ride doing what she had always done with pain that arrived in public places. She filed it somewhere interior and kept her face still. It was a discipline she had been practicing since long before Marcus. She was good at it by now. The house was exactly as she had left it that morning. This was not a comfort. An empty house that belongs to a marriage has a specific quality of silence, not peaceful, not lonely exactly, but suspended, like a room where someone has just stopped speaking. She moved through it without turning on many lights. The kitchen, the hallway, the bedroom where his watch was missing from the nightstand, where his gray jacket, the one she had meant to take to the dry cleaner, was gone from the hook behind the door. She had noticed, in the kitchen, that his phone had synced to the household calendar on the counter tablet before he left. She did not look at it deliberately. She looked at it the way you look at something you already know you're going to find. Not with surprise, but with the quiet exhaustion of confirmation. The entry read, "YI, dinner, pushed to 9. The letters were small. The fact they represented was not. She filled a glass with water. She drank half of it standing at the sink, looking at the back garden through the window. The garden she had planted 3 years ago, which Marcus had once called her little project, in the tone of a man describing something charming and inconsequential. The dahlias were finished for the season. The ornamental grasses moved in the October wind. She set the glass down and did not refill it. She went to the bag she had set on the kitchen chair. The same bag she'd carried into Meridian Tower that morning, the one that held her legal pad, her good pen, and the leather folder. And she lifted the folder out and set it on the table. Then she set her phone beside it. She did not open either one. The folder held 47 pages of closing documents. It held the signature that transferred majority control of 240 commercial parcels, 61,000 square feet of developed commercial space, 11 undeveloped Lakeshore Drive corridor parcels, and the easement rights Marcus's firm had been pursuing through back channels for over a year, into the formal operating trust of Osi Mensa Land Partners. Her name, her grandmother's name, a name that appeared on no surface of her married life, on no joint account, on no holiday card, on nothing Marcus had ever held in his hands. Her phone held a 12-word text from her husband canceling their 11th wedding anniversary. She looked at them both for a long moment. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog announced something to the dark. The house settled in the particular way of old houses, a soft creak from the upper floor that she had stopped hearing years ago and noticed again now only because everything else was so quiet. This was the thing about Celestine Achebe that the people in her life had always misread: her stillness. They took it for passivity. Marcus had built an entire interpretation of their marriage around it, the idea that she was content in the background, comfortable being the kept thing rather than the building thing, grateful for the life he provided. Gloria had reinforced this interpretation at every monthly brunch, in every gentle aside, in every warmly delivered observation about what kind of woman suited what kind of man. And Celestine had never corrected them. Not once. Not because she couldn't, but because she understood, without being able to fully articulate it, that what she was holding required a particular kind of quiet to survive. She was still holding it. She would hold it a little longer. She pulled out the kitchen chair and sat down. She left her coat on. The folder and the phone remained side by side on the table in front of her. Neither opened, the anniversary evening moving slowly through its hours around her. She was not waiting for Marcus. She was not hoping he would come home and explain. She was doing something that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all, and was, in fact, the last quiet moment before everything changed. But to understand what she was holding, and why it mattered, and what it cost her to hold it for as long as she did, you need to know who built it. You need to go back 9 years. You need to start with a woman named Abina, a city called Chicago, and a 2-flat in Bronzeville that cost $8,400 in 1962. Her name was Dr. Abena Mensa Ose, and she did not believe in explaining herself. She arrived in Chicago in September of 1962 with a medical degree from the University of Ghana, $40 in a brown envelope, and the address of a boarding house on South Cottage Grove Avenue written on a folded piece of paper she kept in her left shoe. She was 23 years old. She spoke 3 languages and understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has crossed an ocean alone, that the most reliable thing a person could own was land. Not stocks, not credentials, not the goodwill of people who might change their minds about you. Land stayed. Land did not revise its opinion. She found the 2-flat on South Calumet Avenue in Bronzeville 18 months after she arrived, when she was working double shifts at Cook County Hospital and living in 2 rooms she shared with a nursing student named Vera Mensa. No relation. The building was narrow, 3 stories, in need of a new roof and a great deal of patience. She paid $8,400 for it. She borrowed $4,000 of that from her uncle in Accra, whom she repaid in full over 3 years without being asked. She moved into the ground floor. She rented the upper 2 units. She kept every receipt in a box she labeled simply property. That was how it began. Not with a strategy, not with a vision board or a business plan or a conversation with anyone who might have talked her out of it. It began with one building, one box of receipts, and the unshakable understanding that the land was not going anywhere. Over the next 4 decades, while she opened and ran a family medicine practice on East 47th Street, while she raised 4 children and buried 1 husband and learned the particular arithmetic of doing everything yourself, Abena Mensa Ose bought land. She bought it methodically, quietly, in the near north and the south sides of Chicago, in corridors that other investors looked past or wrote off or simply didn't understand yet. Commercial parcels, vacant lots, old industrial properties along the river's south branch that she held through 2 recessions without flinching. She never borrowed more than she could cover. She never sold a parcel she believed in. She paid her property taxes on time every year for 41 years, and she never once explained the portfolio to anyone who did not have a legal need to know. Her operating philosophy, if she had been pressed to name it, was simple. Let the deeds speak. The deeds always spoke eventually. When she died at 89, in the same ground-floor apartment on South Calumet Avenue where she had lived since 1964, the portfolio held 240 commercial parcels across Cook County, with accrued development rights that her attorneys at OC Legal Partners had spent 3 years carefully valuing. The number they arrived at, documented in the trust transfer executed 14 months before her death, was $13.4 billion. She had started with 8,400. She had told almost no one. She left it entirely to her granddaughter, Celestine. She bypassed Celestine's mother, her own daughter Patricia, who had married a comfortable man in Oak Park, and would be, Abena noted in the trust letter, just fine. She bypassed Patricia not out of preference but out of recognition. She had been watching Celestine since the child was 7 years old. The way she sat at the edge of rooms, attentive and undemanding, the way she asked the kind of questions that revealed she had already thought carefully about what she did not yet know. Abena had understood something about that child that the child herself would not fully understand for years, that her stillness was not absence. It was capacity. The trust was structured under the family name, Osi Mensa Land Partners. Claudette Osi, the daughter of Abena's own longtime counsel Emmanuel Osi, had been named as managing attorney, a woman in her mid-40s by then, precise and unhurried, who had grown up knowing the portfolio the way some children grow up knowing their parents' professions. By proximity, by osmosis, by 1,000 small references that accumulated into expertise. Abena had chosen her deliberately. She chose everything deliberately. Inside the trust binder, on the first page, behind the index and before the asset schedule, was a note card, 3 inches by 5, handwritten in Abena's careful architectural script. It read, "Never apologize for what you were handed. Just know what you have." Celestine read it for the first time on a Thursday evening in March 9 years ago, sitting alone at the kitchen table of the home she shared with Marcus. She was 28. They had been married for 2 years. Abena had been gone for 6 weeks. The binder had arrived via Claudette's office with a cover letter explaining the trust structure in plain professional language, and Celestine had waited until Marcus was at a project dinner downtown before she opened it, not because she was hiding anything, but because she understood instinctively that this was hers, that whatever this was, it belonged to the part of her that had existed before Marcus and would exist after anything. She read the asset schedule. She read the parcel descriptions. She read the trust instrument with its governance provisions and its successor clauses and its careful separations from any marital estate, which Abena had ensured through a structure that predated Celestine's engagement and would have required a court proceeding to undo. Then she called Claudette. The conversation was brief. Claudette explained what Celestine already held. Celestine asked 3 questions, all of them precise. Claudette answered them without editorializing. At the end, Celestine said she would like to keep the portfolio exactly as structured, under the family name, and make no changes at this time. Claudette said that was her right. They agreed to speak quarterly. That night, after the call, Celestine sat for a long time without moving. Something enormous had just settled into the room around her. Not wealth, exactly, or not only wealth, but the accumulated weight of 40 years of her grandmother's patience, placed quietly in her lap like a set of keys to a building she hadn't known existed. Then something surfaced, not quite a memory, more like a hearing. Abena's voice, flat and certain as a survey line. Never apologize for what you were handed. Celestine folded the note card back along its original crease, slid it carefully behind the index, and closed the binder. She carried it to the small desk in the corner of the bedroom, her desk, the one Marcus never used, and placed it in the bottom drawer. She closed the drawer. She went to bed. Marcus came home at 11:15. He did not ask about her evening. He set his keys on the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and went upstairs. He did not notice that anything had changed. He was not wrong, exactly. Nothing had changed that he could have seen. The drawer looked the same. The room looked the same. Celestine looked the same, warm, contained, already turning toward sleep when he came in. He had no reason to look closer. That drawer would stay closed for 9 years, and in all the time it stayed closed, while the marriage shifted, and the distances grew, and the world Marcus was building moved further and further from the one Celestine actually lived in. The portfolio simply continued doing what Abena had always intended it to do. It remained. It grew. It waited, with the patience of land, for the moment it would be needed. The drawer stayed closed, and the marriage changed around it. Not all at once. That is the thing about this particular kind of erosion. It doesn't arrive as a flood. It arrives the way water gets into old foundations. Slowly, at the seams, in places you have to look closely to notice, until one day you look up and find the whole structure has shifted, and you cannot say exactly when. The first years had been good. That is the part that mattered, and the part that made everything harder later. Marcus in the early marriage was warm and present and genuinely interested in her, in the way she thought, in the things she noticed, in the quiet precision of her mind, that he said, in those years, he loved. He brought her coffee in the mornings before she asked. He called in the middle of the afternoon sometimes, for no reason, just to hear her voice. He held her hand at parties. She had believed in him. She wanted the audience to hold on to that because it mattered. What happened later was not inevitable. It was a choice made in small increments over many years, and the distance between who Marcus was and who he became was not the distance of a villain, but of a man who stopped choosing the thing that required effort. The professional language arrived first. It was subtle enough that she almost missed it, a gentle redirection at a dinner party when she offered an opinion about a zoning dispute, his hand touching her arm, his voice sliding smoothly into the conversation to restate what she had said in slightly different terms, as if translating it for the room. She noticed, but said nothing. It happened again 3 weeks later at a firm gathering at the Chicago Athletic Association, where he introduced her to a senior partner. "This is my wife, Celestine. She has a background in land, nothing like what we do, but she's always been curious about the work." The partner had smiled politely and turned back to Marcus. Celestine had kept her expression pleasant and her hands loose at her sides. He didn't know what he was doing. That was the most important thing to understand about Marcus in those middle years. He was not calculating a diminishment. He was simply, gradually, arranging the world into the shape that made him most comfortable, a shape in which he was the one who knew things, who built things, who explained things. And Celestine, by being quietly present and never correcting him, had let him. Gloria had helped. That was not a small thing. Gloria Achebe had an architect's instinct for structure. In the first years she had been careful, warm, welcoming, the kind of mother-in-law who remembered birthdays and kept the good china out for everyone, not just special occasions. But over time, as she grew certain of her son's direction and less certain of the woman beside him, her warmth developed a very precise topography. Compliments that contained their own undoing. "Celestine always makes everything so homey," she said once at a family gathering, gesturing at the dish Celestine had brought, in a tone that placed homey at the bottom of a long, implied hierarchy. At another brunch, "You're so patient with the children. Some women need more than that, but you've always been content." Content, as if contentment were a consolation prize being generously awarded. The monthly brunch at Franklin and Gloria's house on Kenwood Avenue was the primary theater for these performances. It happened on the third Sunday of every month, reliably, with a rotating cast of relatives and neighbors, and the kind of long-standing family friends who had known Marcus since he was 12. Celestine arrived every time with something she had made. A jollof rice she had spent 3 hours on, a sweet potato pie, a dish her grandmother had taught her in the Bronzeville kitchen, and every time the food was received warmly, and her presence was received as pleasant background. She sat slightly outside the center. She spoke when spoken to. She listened to conversations about deals and developments and market movements in which her name never came up and her opinion was never sought, because it had been established by consensus that she was not that kind of person. And while Marcus explained the mechanics of commercial real estate to the table at which his wife sat, the wife who had spent a year in land use consulting before the marriage, who had signed and read and fully understood a $13.4 billion trust instrument, who managed quarterly calls with a senior trust attorney and could recite the acreage of every Lakeshore Drive corridor parcel from memory. He never thought to ask what she thought. He didn't notice. The irony was as sharp as anything in this story, and it was delivered fresh every single month. Then, somewhere in the 7th year, a name appeared. Yvette. She arrived in Marcus's conversation the way water arrives at a seam, so gradually you couldn't name the first moment. A new contact mentioned in passing. An investment associate at Aldridge Partners who had been useful on the Wicker Park deal. Someone he had lunch with to talk through the North Side proposal. The name itself was neutral enough. What was not neutral was the texture of how he said it. A slight compression in his voice when he mentioned her. A specificity of description that went beyond professional necessity. She was sharp, he said. She understood the language of development in a way that was rare. She had instincts. He had said none of those things about Celestine in years. Celestine noticed. She noticed the way she always noticed things, quietly, without comment, filing the observation in the interior place where she kept things she was not yet ready to name. She told herself she was tired. She told herself it was grief. Abina had been gone 3 years, and grief has a long tail, and it does something to your perception. Makes you see shadows in ordinary things. She told herself that a husband admiring a colleague's work was not evidence of anything. She was reasonable. She applied her own reasonableness like a compress to something that was already infected. Then came the receipts, not a single revelation. A slow, reluctant inventory assembled over weeks. A hotel charge on a card statement for a night he had said was a work dinner, a property that didn't require an overnight stay. a calendar entry seen briefly over his shoulder. YA, site walk, followed 3 days later by YA, dinner, pushed to 9, in the shorthand of a recurring appointment. A jacket brought home from what he called a late meeting, carrying the faint specific trace of a fragrance that did not belong to a construction site, or a conference room, or anywhere in the ordinary geography of his professional life. She pulled that jacket from the dry cleaning bag on a Thursday evening in November. She reached into the inside pocket, the way she always did before taking things in, checking for receipts or forgotten items. Her fingers found a folded paper, the thin, slick rectangle of a hotel folio. The Soho house on North Green Street. One night. One room. No client name. She stood in the hallway for a long time. The house was quiet. Daniel and Amara were asleep upstairs. The furnace made its low, reliable sound. She did not move. She did not call him. She did not make a sound of any kind. She simply stood there with the receipt in her hand, her breath coming slowly and carefully, the way breath comes when you are making sure no one hears what you already know. The private knowledge of betrayal is its own kind of weight. And now that she was carrying it, everything that came next would carry it too. She had made her grandmother's jollof rice. 3 hours the night before, the way Abena had taught her. The tomatoes and peppers blended and fried down until the raw smell cooked out entirely and the paste turned the deep, serious red of something that meant it. Long-grain rice added dry, the lid sealed. The heat lowered to the point where the bottom catches just slightly, just enough for the crust that Abena had called the soul of it. Celestine had made it because it was the one thing she brought to the brunch table that no one could redirect or gently qualify. It was simply what it was, and it was finished, and it was good. She carried it in a covered pot to Gloria and Franklin's house on Kenwood Avenue on a Sunday morning in early October, 2 weeks before her anniversary. The house was already full when she arrived. She could hear it from the driveway. The low, layered sound of a gathering that had been warm for an hour before she got there. She rang the bell because she always rang the bell, even after 11 years. Marcus was already seated when she came in. He was at the long dining table in the center of the room, and he was talking, leaning forward slightly, both hands moving, the posture of a man telling a story to an audience he knows is with him. Beside him, one chair closer than professional association typically warranted, sat Yvette Adora. She was in a cream blouse, her posture very straight, her attention on Marcus with the quality of someone who had learned that attention, given in the right register, functions as its own form of communication. She did not look up when Celestine came in. Neither did Marcus. Franklin Achebe, seated at the head of the table, raised a hand in greeting. 2 of Marcus's cousins made room in the kitchen for the pot. Gloria came out of the kitchen herself, hands already extended in welcome, wearing the expression she reserved for moments she intended to control. "Celestine, you came in that?" she said, and her eyes moved briefly, efficiently, across Celestine's dress. It was a good dress, a wrap dress in a deep burgundy, which Celestine had chosen because it fit her full figure warmly and moved well, and was, she had thought that morning, simply a nice dress for a Sunday. A little formal for a family brunch, but you've always had your own sense of things. She touched Celestine's arm. She smiled. She moved back toward the kitchen. A little formal. Celestine set the rice on the counter and kept her hands busy arranging it. Her face turned slightly away from the room while she found her floor again. She took her seat. The table was spread the way it always was at Gloria's, abundant, considered each dish placed with the precision of a woman who understood that hospitality was a form of authority. Celestine's jollof rice, sat in the center without introduction. Marcus did not mention she had made it. He was midway through a story about a permitting delay on a near West Side project, and the table was with him, and Yvette was nodding in the specific way of someone who already knew the details and was performing the pleasure of hearing them again. Then Gloria set down her water glass, touched her husband's arm, and said, "Before we start, I want to share something with everyone." The table softened toward her. Gloria had the gift of rooms. "Your father and I have been discussing what to do with the lakeshore property," she said, looking at Marcus. "And we've decided. We want you to have it. As a gift. You're building something real now, Marcus. The North Side project, everything coming, and a man building a future deserves a foundation." She paused. "We'd like you to have the house." The room received it the way rooms receive announcements that confirm what they already suspected. Warmly, with the small sounds of approval. Franklin nodded, his expression mild and settled. One of Marcus's aunts pressed her hand to her chest. Someone said, "That's a beautiful thing." Marcus looked briefly at Yvette. It was a short look, the kind of look exchanged between people who have already discussed what they are watching unfold. Celestine set down her spoon. She did not make a sound. She looked at the table, at the jollof rice she had made, untouched at the center, and she held everything still inside herself while the room continued around her. What the room did not know, what no one in that house could have calculated, was this. The Lake Shore Drive property Gloria had just gifted her son sat at the northern edge of the development corridor that had been under active trust management by Mensa Land Partners for the last 4 years. The master plan that Claudette's office had been quietly building, the one that would anchor the $13.4 billion consolidation closing 6 weeks from this morning, included parcels that ran directly adjacent to the Achebe family home. Gloria had just handed Marcus a gift that was, financially and legally, one of the most complicated objects he would ever try to hold. He smiled at his mother. He said, "Thank you." Celestine reached for her water glass. Her hand was steady. "You look warm, sweetheart," Gloria said to her then, gently, in the tone of someone offering a helpful observation. "Is it the dress? Sometimes the heavier fabrics. It's all right, not everyone knows how to dress for a room." She turned to refill someone's juice. The conversation moved on. Celestine sat at that table for another hour. She ate. She responded when addressed. She laughed once at something Franklin's cousin said because it was genuinely funny, and she was not performing anything in that moment except herself. At the end, she collected her pot, nearly empty, which meant the rice had been good, said her goodbyes, and drove home. She did not cry in the car. She was past that particular response by now. What she felt was something quieter and more settled. Not resignation, not despair, but the specific weight of a thing becoming undeniable. She had been telling herself a story about drift, about Marcus growing distant under pressure, about Gloria meaning well, about the particular loneliness of marriages that had traveled too far from their beginning to easily return. She had been generous in her interpretations. It was, she understood now, a generosity that had cost her something. What happened at that table was not drift. It was direction. She parked in the driveway. She went inside. She climbed the stairs to the small bedroom desk and opened the bottom drawer. Slowly, the way you open something you are not sure you are ready for. The trust binder sat where it had always sat. She did not take it out. She looked at the spine of it for a long moment. Mensa Land Partners, printed in Claudette's office's clean sans serif type. the initials OLP in the corner. Then she closed the drawer. Not yet. But the distance between not yet and now had, without ceremony, become very small. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in October, her phone lit up in the back of a black car, and the drawer opened. She did not go to bed. After the drawer closed and the house settled, and the October dark came fully down, Celestine went back to the kitchen, picked up the trust binder from where she had left it on the table weeks ago, and carried it to the small sitting room off the main hallway. There, in the corner beside the window, was the armchair. Marcus had never asked about it. That was the thing she noticed in the early years, that he accommodated the chair the way you accommodate furniture that belongs to a house you've moved into, without asking its history. It had come from Abena's apartment on South Calumet Avenue, transported in the back of a rented van the week after the funeral, carried up the front steps by Celestine and her cousin Jerome, because it was the one thing she needed in the house with her. It was old, the leather worn soft at the arms, the cushion shaped by 40 years of a particular person sitting in it with a particular kind of weight and intention. Celestine had recovered it once, in a dark cognac that was close to its original color. Marcus had said, without looking up from his laptop, that it was an odd choice for the room. She sat in it now. She set the binder on her lap. She opened it to the first page and reached behind the index and took out the note card. She had read it many times across 9 years. She knew the words. She could have said them without looking. But she looked, because looking was different from remembering, and tonight she needed to look. Never apologize for what you were handed. Just know what you have. A memory surfaced. Not sharply, but in the way that certain things return when the conditions are finally right. Abena, at her kitchen table in Bronzeville, the last winter she was well enough to have people over. Celestine had been 30, newly pregnant with Daniel, tired in her bones in the way of early pregnancy and accumulated grief. Abena had poured tea without being asked, and said, out of what seemed like silence, "You're very careful, Celestine. You have always been very careful. At some point, careful becomes a kind of hiding." She had not explained further. She had drunk her tea. Celestine had thought, at the time, that she was talking about something else. She understood now that she had not been. The silence she had kept for 9 years was not a single decision. It was 10,000 small ones, each one chosen in the name of something reasonable. Protecting the portfolio's integrity, respecting Abena's structure, keeping something sacred and separate. These were true reasons. They were also, she could see from here, the architecture of a life in which she had made herself as small as possible and called it discretion. She had performed contentment at brunches where she was being quietly erased. She had nodded while Marcus explained the mechanics of land she owned to rooms full of people who believed him. She had watched him describe the Ose Mensa Trust as impenetrable while she refilled his coffee cup, and she had said nothing, and she had told herself the silence was dignified. It was not only dignified, it was also an apology. A long, unspoken, daily apology for existing on terms that were larger than the ones the marriage had assigned her. Abena had told her not to do that. She had been telling her in 4 words on a note card, since the beginning. Celestine sat with this for a while. The house was very quiet. Outside, a car passed. The furnace ran its cycle and stopped. She was not shaking. She was not undone. What she felt, moving through her slowly and with great precision, was something closer to clarity than emotion. The particular sensation of seeing a thing as it actually is, after years of seeing it at an angle. She was not doing this out of calculation. She was not doing this because she wanted to watch Marcus's expression change in a commission chamber or see Yvette's investment dissolve. Those things would happen, perhaps. but they were not the reason. The reason was simpler and, in its simplicity, more serious. She had been given something by a woman who trusted her with it, and she had spent 9 years apologizing for having it, and she was finished with that now. What came next was not a tactic. It was a correction. She picked up her phone. She found Claudette's number. It was 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and she called without hesitating, because Claudette had told her 9 years ago to call when she was ready. She had not specified a time. Claudette answered on the third ring. Her voice was unhurried, as if she had been expecting this call and had simply been waiting for the hour. Celestine spoke 3 sentences. "I want to formally introduce myself to the commission. I want it on the public record, and I want my own attorney present at whatever comes next." There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. Something more like a breath of recognition. "I'll have a date to you by Thursday," Claudette said. "Get some sleep." That was all. Celestine ended the call. She set the phone down on the desk beside the open binder. She smoothed the note card flat with her thumb. Once, deliberately, and set it face up beside the binder so both were visible, both open, both occupying the same surface at the same time for the first time in 9 years. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel the hot, particular release she might have expected after a long compression. What she felt was something quieter than either of those things. It settled in her chest and steadied her breathing, and sat there without asking for anything further. She turned off the desk lamp. She went upstairs. She checked on her children, Daniel first, then Amara, both deeply asleep in the way of children who do not yet know that the ground beneath them has just shifted. She stood in each doorway for a moment. Then she went to bed. 6 weeks later, the Planning Commission date arrived. The Chicago City Planning Commission met on the second Thursday of December in a hearing room on the 4th floor of City Hall, in a building that smelled of old stone and institutional carpet and the particular staleness of rooms where consequential things happen without ceremony. The session was scheduled for 9 a.m. The agenda listed 11 items. Item 7 was the Northside Mixed-Use Development Proposal submitted by Achebe Luce Development Group, easement review and public benefit assessment, pending response from affected trust. Marcus arrived at 8:40 with his 4 partners, Jerome Luce, his co-founder, David Park, who handled finance, Renata Mbeki, who managed permitting, and a younger partner named Chris Adiemi, who had joined the firm 2 years ago, and still, occasionally, deferred to Marcus in ways that Marcus found quietly sustaining. Their architect, a man named Stefan Holtz, from the firm Holtz Gravis Design, came in behind them with a portfolio case and a presentation tablet. And beside Marcus, taking the seat one removed from his own, was Yvette Adora, listed in the session's public filing as a private investor with a documented financial stake in the project. They arranged themselves at the respondents' table with the ease of people who had done this before. Marcus opened his folder. He reviewed nothing in it. He already knew everything in it. That was the kind of man he was in professional rooms, prepared beyond preparation, performing composure because composure was, for him, its own form of dominance. Item 1 was called. Then 2. Then 3. The commission worked through its morning agenda with the methodical patience of a body that knew time was a resource and wasted none of it. Marcus checked his phone once. He put it away. Yvette sat with her hands folded on the table, her posture straight, her attention forward. She had the quality, in professional settings, of someone who understood that stillness reads as authority. She had learned this and deployed it well. Item 7 was called at 9:52. The commission chair, a compact woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had run these sessions for 11 years and had seen most things twice, looked at her notes and said, Achebe Luce Development Group, Northside Mixed-Use Proposal. We have the presentation on file. We also have a response filed by the affected trust, Ose Mensa Land Partners, whose representative has been invited to address the easement item in person. Before we hear from the development team, we'll receive the trust's representative. Is counsel present? The door at the side of the room opened. Claudette Ose came in first. She was in charcoal gray, her briefcase in hand, her expression carrying the particular neutrality of someone who has been the most prepared person in every room she has entered for 30 years and no longer needs to announce it. She held the door. Celestine walked in behind her. She was in a deep navy wool suit, structured, unhurried, with Abina's single strand of gold at her collarbone, the same strand she had worn to the closing 6 weeks ago. Her full figure moved through the room with the ease of a woman who had stopped managing how she occupied space. She carried her leather folder. Her hands were steady. She did not look at the respondent's table when she entered. She looked at the commission. Patricia Okonkwo said, "Please state your name and capacity for the record." Claudette said, "Claudette Ose, Ose Legal Partners, Counsel of Record for Ose Mensa Land Partners. With me is my client, Miss Celestine Achebe, controlling trustee of Ose Mensa Land Partners." The room did not go dramatically silent. It was already a quiet room. But something shifted in it, a subtle redistribution of attention, the way a room rearranges itself when the center of gravity moves without announcement. Patricia Okonkwo noted the appearance for the record and directed both women to the respondent's position at the secondary table. Celestine sat. She opened her folder. She did not look at Marcus. Marcus looked at her. The confusion crossed his face in sequence, the way comprehension sometimes arrives. First, the simple question of why she was here, then the restatement of what had just been said for the record, then the collision of those two things producing something he had no prepared response for. His jaw did not drop. He was too controlled for that. What happened was subtler and more total, a stillness that was not his usual composure but its opposite, the stillness of a man whose internal architecture has just received information that does not fit any of its existing structures. Jerome Luce, seated beside him, turned to look at Celestine with the specific expression of a man attempting to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed he knew. He was the partner who had been at the development dinner 4 years ago, the one where Marcus had explained easement mechanics to his wife, slowly, generously, as one explains things to someone who will find them interesting but not entirely follow them. He remembered that dinner. The expression on his face said that he remembered it very clearly. Yvette did not turn. She looked at the commission table. Her hands, still folded, tightened by a fraction. It was the only movement she made. The calculation behind her eyes was not readable as emotion. It was readable as arithmetic. Patricia Okonkwo said, "Ms. Achebe, the Commission has reviewed the Trust's written response. Would you like to address the easement request directly?" Celestine looked up from her folder. She said, "Yes, thank you." Her voice was even. Not cold, even. The difference mattered. Cold would have been a response to something. This was simply the register of a woman who had decided what she was going to say and was now saying it, without performance and without apology. She addressed the commission. She did not address Marcus. She did not address Yvette or Jerome Luce or anyone at the respondents' table. She spoke to Patricia Okonkwo and to the 4 other commissioners seated beside her, and she spoke as someone who had spent 9 years understanding this portfolio at a level that no one in the room had been given reason to anticipate. She said the trust had reviewed the easement proposal in full. She said the Northside project was sound in its fundamentals, and represented a legitimate public benefit for the near North Corridor. She said the trust had no objection to the easement in principle. Then she said the trust had prepared 3 amendments to the easement terms, which she would like to read into the public record. The first amendment concerned the public access provisions on the ground floor retail corridor. The current proposal allocated 18% of the corridor to publicly accessible green space, and the trust's position was that 30% was both achievable within the current footprint and more consistent with the Commission's stated density guidelines for the area. The second amendment concerned the construction timeline's impact on an adjacent parcel under trust management. Specifically, the trust required a 90-day notification window before any excavation within 40 feet of the eastern property line, a standard protective provision for adjacent landowners that had been absent from the original filing. The third amendment was a community benefit fee, $1.2 million, directed to the Bronzeville Community Development Fund in acknowledgement of the development's proximity to a historically underinvested corridor whose land values the project would materially affect. She read all 3 from her folder. Precisely, without pausing, without looking up until she was finished. When she finished, she closed the folder. She looked at Patricia Okonkwo and said, "The trust has reviewed the proposal. It's approved, subject to those 3 amendments." 13 words, delivered to the commission chair, not to her husband. Patricia Okonkwo said, "Thank you, Ms. Achebe. The commission will take those amendments under review." She made a note. She moved on. At the respondents' table, Jerome Luce leaned toward Marcus and said something, very quietly. Marcus did not respond. He was looking at the table in front of him, at his folder, still open to the first page, the page he had reviewed and found himself already knowing. His hands were flat on the table. He did not move them. Yvette reached for her water glass. She set it down without drinking. Her expression had completed its calculation and arrived somewhere unreadable. It was the face of someone who had already decided what happened next and was simply waiting for the room to clear. Celestine gathered her materials. She aligned the edges of the papers in her folder with a single smooth motion. She capped her pen. She said something brief and professional to Claudette, who nodded once. Then she stood, straightened her jacket over her full hips with the ease of a woman comfortable in her own frame, and walked out of the room. The session continued. Item 8 was called. The commission moved forward, as commissions do, because the work does not pause for the weight of what just happened in a room. Marcus sat at the table while it all continued around him. He did not present the project that morning. Jerome Luce handled it. Marcus sat with his hands flat and his folder open to the first page, and the particular expression of a man who has just understood, with total clarity and too late, what he had been sitting across from for 11 years. What happens in a room full of witnesses cannot be undone. And what came next came quickly. The divorce filing, which Claudette submitted on Celestine's behalf in the 3rd week of December, triggered a mandatory asset disclosure process that Marcus's attorneys were not prepared for. They had built their strategy around a relatively straightforward marital estate: the family home, Marcus's partnership interest in Achebe Luce, 2 joint accounts, a retirement portfolio. What they received instead, in the first round of trust documentation from Ose Legal Partners, was the full asset schedule for Ose Mensa Land Partners. 240 commercial parcels, 61,000 square feet of developed space, the Lakeshore Drive corridor, the North Side easement parcel, 11 separate development rights packages, each with its own accrued value notation. The attorneys requested a 2-week extension to review the materials. Claudette granted 7 days. The Lakeshore Drive property, the one Gloria had gifted Marcus at brunch in front of the family to set him up for his real future, sat adjacent to a corridor that the Trust's master development plan had designated as a priority appreciation zone. Its projected value over the next 5 years had been materially recalculated the moment the Trust's consolidation closed in October. Marcus's attorneys spent 3 days trying to argue it should be excluded from the marital asset calculation. They were not successful. Yvette Adora withdrew her investment stake from the Northside project 11 days after the commission hearing. She sent a single letter through her own counsel to Achebe Luce's finance team, citing a strategic reallocation of her portfolio. She did not contact Marcus directly. She did not explain further. Jerome Luce, who handled the withdrawal paperwork, said nothing about it to anyone. He had learned something at that commission table, and he was still processing it. Marcus called Celestine once, in January, on a Sunday evening. Claudette's instructions had been clear: all communications through counsel. Celestine saw the call come in. She let it go to voicemail. She listened to the message later, alone, standing at the kitchen counter with her coat still on from the school pickup. His voice was quiet in it. Not the voice of a man making arguments, but of a man who had arrived, finally and too late, at the thing he had never been willing to sit with. He said he understood now. He said he was sorry. He said some things that were true. Celestine stood and listened to all of it, all. Then she set the phone down, took off her coat, and started dinner for her children, because they were hungry and it was Sunday and the world continued. She did not call back. Gloria sent a card in February. Then, 3 weeks later, she called. Celestine answered, because she had always answered, and because the warmth she had extended across 11 years of difficult dinners had never been performance. It had been herself, and she was not going to become someone different now. Gloria said she had not known. She said it carefully, the way a woman says something she needs to be believed. Celestine told her that she knew, and that it was all right, and she meant both things fully. They spoke for 7 minutes. Gloria's voice, at the end, was smaller than Celestine had ever heard it. They did not schedule another call. They did not need to. The Northside project proceeded with Celestine's 3 amendments incorporated. The commission ratified the revised easement terms in January. Ground was broken in March. The public access green space, expanded from 18 to 30% per the Trust's requirement, was later cited in a Chicago Tribune piece on community-centered development as a model provision for the corridor. The Bronzeville Community Development Fund received its $1.2 million contribution on April 3rd. Celestine read the notification email from Claudette at her kitchen table and set her phone face down and was quiet for a moment because Abina had spent 40 years buying land in Bronzeville for $8,000 at a time, and this felt like a completion of something. Then something settled, not dramatically, but in the way that a room finally comes to rest after a long disturbance. It was a Saturday in May when Celestine brought the children to the Bronzeville 2 flat for the first time since the proceedings concluded. Daniel and Amara ran through the rooms the way children run through unfamiliar spaces, with the specific energy of people encountering a place that does not yet belong to their memory, but is beginning to. Celestine let them. She made tea. She listened to their voices move through the rooms above her, the sound of small feet on old floors, the building receiving them. When they had worn themselves out and gone upstairs to sleep in the narrow beds she had set up in the back room, Celestine sat at the kitchen table. The old windows were open. Chicago came through them. Traffic on South Calumet, a neighbor's radio somewhere above, a distant siren moving away. The city had been doing this for 60 years in this building. It would keep doing it long after. She reached into her bag and took out the note card. She set it on the table and looked at it for a moment before she read it. The way you look at something before you need to change your relationship with it. Then she read it one last time. Never apologize for what you were handed. Just know what you have. She turned it over. The back was blank. It had always been blank. She understood now why Abena had left it that way. Not because she ran out of things to say, but because she had said exactly enough. The instruction was the floor. Everything built on it belonged to Celestine. She set the card face up on the table. She left it there. There is a particular kind of power that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't need a room's attention or a table's approval or anyone's permission to be real. It accumulates quietly, over years, in deeds and documents and decisions made in private at kitchen tables while the world is doing something else. It doesn't require the people who underestimated it to understand it. It simply remains. And when the moment comes, it doesn't perform. It arrives. Celestine Mensa Ose Achebe had known what she had for 9 years. She had simply finally stopped apologizing for it. Think about the women in your life, or perhaps yourself, who have been carrying something quietly that the room they were sitting in had no idea about. The women who were written off, translated around, managed and contained and maneuvered out of spaces that were, in fact, entirely theirs. This story is for them. If it moved you, if it felt true to something you know, leave a comment and tell us about it. And wherever in the world you're listening from tonight, let us know. This community, all of you, are exactly why these stories get told. The tea cooled in its cup. Chicago moved through the open windows, unhurried and enormous, and entirely indifferent to what had just come to rest at this table. Celestine's hand lay beside the note card, still. The blank side faced up. She did not turn it over again. She already knew what was on the other side. The instruction, the foundation, the beginning, and she had already done what came next.